That's great. Upcoming conversations on the Commons. Later in March, we are going to have a conversation on the Commons about publishing in Massachusetts history with representatives of two publishing houses. Um, and then on March 12th, we're going to have the second installment of our series on authors and publishing in Massachusetts history. And this is on the History Studio and will be at 7 o'clock in the evening. On April 2nd, rather, we will have a history studio with Elizabeth Sheehy and her book A Home in Woods Hole, and that is the third installment. In April, we are planning a conversation on the Commons on presenting Latino history. Before we start, here's some housekeeping. Once we start the conversation, please keep your microphone muted until you are called on. This is, again, meant to be an informal conversation. We invite you to turn on your video. Use the chat. We send it around after. Introduce yourself, raise any questions, share resources, or raise tech issues. Let us know if you have something to say by raising your hand in the participants list. And if you're on the phone, just ask to break in. Make sure that your name is correct in the participants list. You can do this by hovering over your name in the list, then clicking More. If you're on your phone, just click Participants and then click your name. If we get Zoom bombed, we will immediately close the conversation and send you a link for a new one to start immediately. So look at your email if that happens. This has never happened, but you never know. After today's conversation, please leave us with a survey response. The link will be in the chat. For those of you following the live stream on YouTube, there is a link to the survey in the Conversations archive on the Mass History Commons website. That's masshistorycommons.org. I'd like to thank MHA's top sponsors, Mass Humanities, the State Historical Records Advisory Board, Mike Petoskey, and the Dorchester Historical Society. You can find all of our sponsors on the Commons website. The link will be in the chat. We also like to invite you to list your organization in the Commons directory and sponsor the Commons. Everything costs money. If you can only spare $25, we'll gladly have it. And listing your organization in the directory is totally free. And that is also if you have a business. The directory is not only for organizations, but also those who work with organizations. All right, so now we get to start our program, and I'm going to introduce our moderator, who is Gloria Grice. She has been the executive director of the Needham History Center and Museum since 2002. She is also a member of that town's historical commission and serves on appointed boards that involve town history, such as downtown redevelopment, renovation of municipal historic buildings, etc. She has also been on the Mass History Conference Planning Committee for the last several years and has been a presenter, session organizer, and moderator at the conference. Take it away, Gloria.
Thank you, Plune. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We look forward to a lively conversation. This is a topic that is pretty much top of mind right now for most of us. Federal funding is in great turmoil at the moment. So join us in breaking down what funding and projects stand to be affected in the realm of public history in Massachusetts, which sources in Massachusetts are connected to federal funding, which are part of the state budget, and which are a little of both. So what funding is private? How can your organization find out the funding sources for particular grants and initiatives? And I should point out there will be a part 2 of this discussion in the fall when we talk about response and advocacy. So today is pretty much information. We want to talk about sort of what's out there and what the resources are and how they come down to us as a grant seeker. It's a rapidly changing situation. We know that what we think today may be different tomorrow. Nobody has a crystal ball, so they're not going to be final answers. We're going with what we know now. There will be some changes. So if you have not done so, please fill out the poll. We've got, I think, a couple people left, and then we will discuss are we ready to close it, Rachel, or?
Sure, we can. That way everyone can see what's
Okay.
going on the screen.
Okay, yeah. So it looks like most of our participants come from local historical societies, museums, and historic houses. Just over half. There are some members from local historical commissions, one from a public library, a couple from educational organizations, 3 from government agencies, one from a consortium, 2 from preservation organizations. So that gives us a pretty good idea of who's in the room and what our general concerns are, and that helps the speakers also as they answer questions and make their comments. We have 3 speakers today. I will introduce them individually. They will have a brief presentation, and then after that, we will open the conversation for discussion. Our first panelist is Elizabeth O'Connell. She has spent the last 4 years working in digital archives at the Massachusetts Archives and has been the head of digital team for the past 2 years. Her focus has been on identifying and making accessible records of marginalized groups in Massachusetts and preserving oral histories and digitizing records of international interest. She also serves on the State Historical Records Advisory Board, where she assists with matters related to digital record preservation and digitization. She believes that digital archives are the future of archives and a way to make more equitable the access to our shared history. She has an undergraduate degree in art history from the University of Kentucky and a master's of library and information science from Syracuse University. Please welcome Elizabeth O'Connell. Elizabeth, you need to unmute. There you go.
Sorry about that. It's a keyboard press and I somehow missed it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where SHRAB gets funding for its programs from. It's fairly straightforward. We, as the State Historical Records Advisory Board for Massachusetts, we receive one of the state board planning grants from NHPRC, which is part of NARA. We apply for the 2-year grants, which the good news is we were approved last year for our next 2 years. So we are actually funded for our next 2 years. So you don't need to worry at all about that funding. Obviously, with everything going on, we have been a little bit worried about, the years after the next couple of years. And we are pursuing alternative methods of funding. We have received some relatively, I would say, optimistic responses from some, state agencies on potentially having our funding come from the state of Massachusetts rather than federal in the future. So hopefully so. Obviously, that funding is used to sponsor the Roving Archivist Program, which I'm sure at least a couple of you have benefited from in the past. It also funds any regrants we do, and it funds our archival field fellowships that we do. And so none of that right now is in any sort of jeopardy. Those programs will continue on for the next 2 years, and then you always have to see where you're at every 2 years with a grant. I'm going to drop in just the link to our grants and programs for people. Currently, we are not taking applications for any of them, but they do open throughout the year. And then another big piece of funding that SHRAB administers are the Veterans Heritage Grants, which these grants are for projects related to veterans and veterans history. And these grants can be used for a variety of things. They can be used for building monuments. They can be used for organizing records or digitizing records or conserving things. They can be used for updating exhibitions, things like that. This money actually comes directly from the Massachusetts legislature. It is part of the Secretary of the Commonwealth's budget every year. Obviously, they can choose not to fund that every year, but they've been funding it for quite a while. So we have every anticipation that we will continue to receive the Veterans Heritage Grant money as well. I see that Georgia has asked how confident we are that the funding will be released. Obviously, that's the big concern everyone has. If it's not, that is when we would have to pursue probably legal action, because it's already been, endowed and promised to us. Like legally it's all our money. So I anticipate that likely it will come through. It's not a great amount of money. So I have a feeling it's not a focus, in all honesty. And as I said, if for some reason they fail to provide that money, we are looking at alternatives through state funding. It is a program that the secretary and the state wants to see continued. So I'm not too worried about our continued ability to support organizations across the state. So I hope that's maybe your good news of the of the conversation. Are there any other questions for me? Like I said, it was going to be very short and sweet.
We will go on with the presentations and we'll take questions at the end so we can,
Right.
I think there will be a bunch of questions that will refer to all of the speakers. So our second panelist is David Slattery. He has served as Mass Cultural Council's Deputy Executive Director since 2012. Under the Executive Director, Dave provides executive leadership and support and counsel to the agency and council members. He also serves as Chief Legal Officer for the agency. So on your way.
All right. Thank you, Gloria. So as Gloria just mentioned, I'm Dave Slattery, Deputy Director of Mass Cultural Council. Mass Cultural Council is an independent state agency supporting the arts, humanities, and interpretive sciences across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And just so you don't get confused, interpretive sciences means things like zoos, aquariums, the Museum of Science, nature preserves, etc. We are governed by a 19-member council appointed by the governor. We are about a $34 million state agency funded primarily by state funds, though we have some federal funds as well. And we support the creative and cultural sector across the Commonwealth. In fact, we just did a recent inventory of the size of the sector, and it's much larger than we ever thought. Over 15,000 organizations, about 110,000 people work in the sector as we have defined it. And we support probably some much smaller percentage of that through grant programs. And we run a number of support programs for the creative and cultural sector. And I'm going to put the number of things in the chat as we go on. And I'm pasting right now our programs at a glance, the various, did it post? How do it doesn't seem to, oh, there we go. And these range from operating support programs to cultural organizations to local, to projects and festivals, and to capital grants for capital improvements in organizations, to individual grants, to grants to local cultural councils in every single city and town in Massachusetts. I think I did see in the poll that more than half of the people attending this webinar are familiar with us, so that's good to know. We also receive about $1.2 million a year federally, and that comes from the National Endowment for the Arts. And as we're a $34 million agency, it's $1 million is significant, but it's only about 3.5% of our budget. And let me post just so you can see our funding link in there, so you can just get an idea. We get we use the federal money for largely, except for some small programs like Poetry Out Loud and traditional heritage programs, which are about $20,000 or $30,000 each. We use the mass of the money to supplement existing state programs we use. We use it to provide funding under our organizational support program to organizations. We supplement the state funds with the federal funds. I should point out that while our state mission is to support arts, sciences, and humanities, and in fact, we do support in a big way our next speaker, Mass Humanities, and Catherine, with about just under $1 million a year. Our federal money does come from the National Endowment for the Arts, so it is limited to arts organizations. So technically, none of the federal money we give is going to perhaps any of you history organizations or humanities organizations. However, I should say that if we ever did lose our national, again, we're not afraid of that at this point, but if we ever did lose our NEA federal money, it would probably reduce our granting across the board, across the agency. So I would point out that our national, and again, we had a question earlier to kind of get to something Elizabeth said, that we were worried this year when the funding freeze came down in January, because we had about $400,000 we were waiting to get from the NEA for this year, but just found out this week that that money has in fact arrived. So we are all set with our federal funding for this fiscal year. Again, next year is the question. I would point out that the NEA has not yet published its guidelines for the money it shares with state arts agencies throughout the nation. However, it has recently announced a grant, its project program out there. And this is a program to support arts and culture programs, I think, of grants of up to $25,000. They canceled another grant program, Challenge America, and consolidated it into this one. They are encouraging but not requiring the grants be used to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. And they have added a new set of guidelines, which I will post in the chat, an assurance of compliance, which I think a lot of people will have strong opinions about, but these are not subject to what we have to follow in our grants, but we anticipate, because they haven't been published yet, but we anticipate they will look a lot like that. They say that we will comply with the new executive orders, that anybody accepting federal funds will not operate DEI programs that violate anti-discrimination laws. And there is a kind of a section in there that says any applicant understands that their federal funds shall not be used to promote gender ideology, though I'm not quite sure what that means. I should say that we went to last Friday, there was a seminar by the NEA, or a discussion by the Americans for the Arts with Mary Ann Carter, the acting head of the NEA. She headed the NEA under the first Trump administration. She did say that these requirements were not too much to worry about. They're really meant to prohibit things that, quote, exclude certain groups, and it will be perfectly legitimate for the NEA to support things like Black History Month or Hispanic Heritage Month. Those were the two examples she used, as long as such activities did not specifically exclude any group. Although she did say that they were seeking further legal guidance from the administration. I do want to make it clear that we don't have any new rules that we're reacting to yet, though we anticipate they will look like what I just posted here. We are at Mass Cultural Council very much committed to our diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. We are not walking away from them. So, oops. So I'm sorry that I tried to things post. Well, so there are the requirements that I was referring to. And here is the blog post our executive director, Michael Bobbitt, issued saying that we remain committed to our DEI goals. We do not believe any of them violate civil rights laws. We didn't believe they violated them before. We don't believe they violate them today. And so we are committed to them, but we will see how we react when the rules that govern the dispersal of federal funds come out later this year. I'm happy during the remainder of this webinar, if there are any questions later on, to talk about the grant programs that Mass Cultural Council has that may be of use to history organizations such as yourself. And as I said, 96.5% of those programs are funded with non-federal money. So we anticipate we anticipate being able to do that in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, David. Our third panelist is Catherine Stevens. She's the Director of Grants and Programs at Mass Humanities. She has a PhD in American Studies from Harvard University. And as Dave mentioned, she gets some of her funding from the state and some of her funding from the federal government. So she has a slightly different rubric. Catherine, go ahead.
Thanks, Gloria. And thanks everyone for being here. It's just really great to see how many people are showing up for this conversation. So as Gloria said, I'm Director of Grants and Programs at Mass Humanities. And I saw that many of you have applied to our grants before, so you're familiar with us. We're a nonprofit organization, and we are also a partner, a state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, as well as a partner with the Mass Cultural Council. So I can talk a little bit about, I think, overall, what the National Endowment for the Humanities funds in the state of Massachusetts. And then I'll also speak to our grants and sort of where the funds from those grants come. So just, as a big picture overview, total direct grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities to the state of Massachusetts since 2019 is $50 million. That's a lot of money. 33 million of those is to organizations that are not higher education. Right? We tend to think NEH is higher ed, but it's important to say that actually they do also fund 33 million. So about 60% of that is non-higher ed organizations. So museums, libraries, documentary film, archives, historical societies, a lot of the kinds of organizations who are here today. Mass Humanities re-grants funding that comes to us through our partnership with Mass Cultural Council. So I think that's important for everybody here to know. So our grant programs are funds from Mass Cultural Council and also from private funders who see the work that our grantees do and want to support it. So, and we made that choice because federal funding can be challenging to work with, and also it is, as we are experiencing, uncertain. So our total grant making has risen from about $500,000 in 2019 per year to about $1 million and a little bit more per year currently. And a lot of that comes through the partnership with Mass Cultural Council, the work that they do in their advocacy work with Mass Creative to increase the state budget for the cultural sector. And so I think that's also really important to say here, and I might also speak to advocacy. I know that that's going to be a topic for your future conversation, but the participation of the history sector in that advocacy is really important. I think will remain, or it could increase in importance when we think about the changes to the funding landscape and how important that state funding is going to be should there be cuts, right, to federal funding. So I think that it's that advocacy work that Mass Creative does, that Mass Humanities partners with Mass Cultural Council on, that is really important, and that is the source of most of the funds that we give out in the sector. So I think in terms of things I'm going to put into the chat, since the Advocacy Week for the cultural sector is coming up before, it sounds like, Mass History Alliance's advocacy conversation. I'm just going to put that in the chat. So that's April 30th, I think. And, Mass Humanities intends to take, ourselves, our board members, and also if there are folks in this space who have received Mass Humanities grants, would be interested in joining us, you can definitely email me. I'll put my email address in, or our executive director. Watching me type live. There we go. So I just think that that's, super important to think about when we think about where funding comes from. Like I said, we also do seek funds from private sources. So large foundations who maybe would be a challenge for a small organization to reach, but if we can reach them and get a significant amount of money to re-grant to small organizations, that's another approach that we take. I thought I would just drop in since it might be of interest. I know the IMLS is also a big direct grantor to museums and history organizations. And so I did look up, you can look up how many grants have been given out to, by state, by year, through all their programs. And I'll also just drop the most recent NEH publication of the grants by state. So you'll be able to see what 2025 looked like. In terms of Mass Humanities and our mission, obviously we are committed to our mission, not stepping away from it. We're going to be announcing our grant opportunities in, I think, 2 weeks. We're finalizing things, scrubbing all the, all the missed, crossed, dotted I's or crossed T's, and making sure I got the dates right is the main thing. And I think we'll also be speaking to the orientation of that grant making and how we see the work that we do responding to this moment and this coming year. So I think there'll be probably a blog, maybe a blog post or a newsletter, potentially publication from our executive director. We're hoping next week or the week we are announcing the grant. So you'll be able to see that too. I think that's all I have to say at the moment. So thank you all.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you to all three panelists. We have a couple questions to start off with, and this is actually for the panelists. You all touched on this, and I know you all put resources in the chat, so you don't need to go into great detail. But if you just want to give us a quick overview of the funding sources in your grant lines that are of interest to small and medium-sized historical organizations. And any commentary on, and I think you touched on this as well, ways in which your ability to fulfill these grants or provide these grants might be currently at risk.
Okay. I'll kick off if that's okay. So we have a number of grants in the Programs at a Glance link that I put in originally, but I would say for small and mid-sized organizations, we do have an operating grants for organizations program, which is out there providing organizational support. I will say that that is heavily subscribed. I believe we got over 500 applications and we were able to make 170 grants this year. So that provides anywhere from $6,000 to $50,000 a year in unrestricted operating support, depending on an organization's budget size. And again, these are all assuming that the state budget is is somewhat equivalent to what the governor filed as her state budget, and we have relative level funding in the next fiscal year. We have a new program. Well, it's not a new program. It's a renamed merged program coming out, I think on March 5th, called Creative Experiences. It funds festivals, projects, and school and creative projects in schools, whether it's the arts, sciences, or humanities, of two grant levels, $2,500 or $5,000, depending on the size of the planned activity. That will be being announced next week. It will be voted on next fiscal year, next summer, and would be money that would be available next year, FY26. We fund approximately $5.7 million to local cultural councils in every single city and town in Massachusetts. So I would encourage you, if you're not already, most historical societies are very well of their local cultural council, but if you are not, I would encourage applying for those. Those tend to be smaller grants because they get the amount of allocations to each town, I think, range from a high of $300,000 for the city of Boston to, I think, the lowest one is $5,600 at smaller cities and towns and everywhere in between. But they have money, and that's locally based funding. And I think that's all. We also have grants for creative individuals, for people that practice generally. So to the extent that there are actual individual humanists out there, historians, to support their own work, they can certainly apply. And again, that's a very competitive program. I believe we received 3,000 applications this year, and we're able to make about 450 grants. But we also have a capital grant program for people that are doing physical space, and we've worked with a number of historic homes, historic museums, and historic societies to provide capital grants. It's a matched program that we do through our partners, Mass Development. We provide up to $200,000 in capital needs to support, it can be new construction, but it's mainly done for maintenance projects on existing cultural organizations' facilities out there. That's a long list, but that's off the top of my head. Thanks.
Yeah, Elizabeth.
Oh, I was just going to say that for direct funding to small and mid-sized institutions, obviously there's the Veterans Heritage Grants, which is state. That funding comes from the state. I am not anticipating much change in that. And then we more work with agencies through our roving archivist program or our field fellow program. So there's not a lot of direct money that goes from SHRAB to institutions. It's more that we use the money we receive to provide services. But as I said, that is federal. We were approved for the grant. I'm anticipating being able to receive the money, so there shouldn't be any disruption in those services.
I can speak to Mass Humanities. Like I said, we're going to be announcing our grant programs for the year in the next 2 weeks, but broadly they are the Expand Massachusetts Stories opportunity, which is for projects that surface and share stories of Massachusetts, particularly those that don't usually get heard or recognized. We also have the Reading Frederick Douglass Together program, which is a great small grant. Who knows that program very well? And it's a great small grant for community readings of Frederick Douglass's speech on the meaning of the 4th of July. And it can be a good base for building other programming around it, which is what a lot of organizations do. That's actually open right now. So you can apply for those now. All that is up and moving. And that is on there's a monthly application cycle for that. So when we finalize the guidelines and the dates for everything, all of our grants will be up on our website, on our grants page. And you can look at those guidelines and processes. So we're committed this year to giving out grants, right, to resourcing this field.
Hey, thank you. Now I want to open up our conversation to everybody who's here on the chat, on the call. We have 42 people, which is great. Do you have any questions right now for any of the presenters about your own situation or what you see going forward or projects you may be planning? You can you can either just wave at me, but I've got 2 pages, so I may not see you all. So put your hand up, which is is it in the chat? Yeah. Beth.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm trying to hold it together because I am really, really, really upset, and I'm going to save that for the advocacy. But I guess my question is, what are we seeing in terms of private and even state level upping of contributions. Because, for instance, when we as a very small organization look at our partnerships, which include federal entities, we are not only losing resources from that partnership, but we are preparing to step in if there are necessities that, for their mission that they are not able to complete in terms of programming and assisting in making sure that the stories that need to get told are told. And I guess I'm concerned, very concerned, that there's not going to be a resource for making up for that federal funding. And also at the state level, I have to be very honest and say that we did not apply for the grant at the state level for the 250th because we were told in the guidelines that a full 40% of the evaluation process was for tourism, and whether we could drive economic development for the state. And I'm very glad to see that the projects that are coming out of that were funded are actually stories that are from marginalized individuals and groups, and not something that I would have thought would drive tourism. But it's discouraging that the advertising of what these projects are supposed to be versus what is actually getting funded doesn't seem to line up. So I guess just wondering where that money is coming from if we are not able to tap into, or if federal funding is not does not come through as promised, or does not get renewed. Where are there private organizations or on the state level is state government stepping in to specifically fill those voids? Thank you.
Do any of the panelists want to respond, or?
Yeah, I'd happy to jump in and say that, again, we have we've received nothing on our case from the state legislature other than support and wanting to support us, though understanding that compared to prior years, this does seem to be even a tough state budget year. So I don't know. We don't know what funds will be available. And I will say, to your point on the the Mass 250 grants, that is specifically granted to the Office of Travel and Tourism. And so, yes, that travel and tourism was a major impetus behind those grants. Although I think, having worked with them and having meetings, and we were encouraging arts organizations and humanities organizations to apply for them, they are trying to do a job of being as inclusive as possible. They are very aware of this. Again, I can't speak, I'm not part of that grant process, but certainly in the discussions with them, that has seemed to be very important to Mont.
We did have an earlier conversation about working with the Mass Office of Travel and Tourism. And I think, since the Rev 250 celebrations are going to go on for approximately a year and a half, I think that will be a conversation that we probably will revisit as well, because that's going to loom large for everybody's programming, I think, for the next couple of years. Susan Grabsky, you have a question?
I do. I have a couple questions. Mainly, nice to see everyone. By the way, this is always nice to see all our colleagues all in one little screen. So my question is about Mass Cultural Council grants. We were fortunately awarded an operating grants that we were just made aware we don't have to reapply for till FY29. So that's great, assuming that all of those funds are still there in FY29. We currently have an application in through the Cultural Facilities Fund. And while at this point we don't know how favorably that application will be received, are those monies for that grant round pretty certain, or does that still depend on a pending budget vote?
Yeah, let me answer your first question, your last question first. The Cultural
Okay.
Facilities Fund is funded a little bit differently. It doesn't come from the state legislature. It comes from the governor's capital plan, which means it's been authorized, and the governor when the Commonwealth borrows money. So we're using borrowed funds to make grants, and we've been assigned $10 million a year since the first year of the Baker administration. So I would say 10 years going strong. We feel very strong. We know the Healy Driscoll administration, as was the prior administration, believed a lot in putting capital money out there to preserve the cultural treasures of the Commonwealth at all levels. So, and I will say that we have tried to make work on our own to make that money. Part of what, so to those of you who know our executive director, Michael Bobbitt, who's been here now 4 years, we've been trying to greatly increase our usage, and it's been great. We have many more applications than we ever had before, but I will say that means we don't have as much money, so we don't have as much money to spread around as before. So we have a lot more applications and a lot more people that don't have a positive outcome because we just don't have enough money and we have more applicants. But what we're trying to do in the Cultural Facilities Fund is we're putting we're making it so that when people apply, and if their project is eligible, we're putting them in a queue so they don't have to reapply year after year. So if we run out of money, and we can't fund their project that year, they can come in and get it next year, so they don't have to go through the process of applying again. And we're also put in place a 2-year pause between grants to make sure that the same people, the very sophisticated organizations that do very good applications, but we don't want the same big organizations getting the money every year, so that they'll have to wait 2 years between grants. The idea so that we can spread the money around among more cultural organizations. And we are happy that we've had, and this has been true every year, but especially in the last 4 years, we've had a strong percentage of 30 to 40% of the applicants to the Cultural Facilities Fund have been new people over the past year. So we are reaching new people, but it just means there are more people asking for a pile of dollars, which aren't going up as fast as the number of applicants. But we encourage you to apply nonetheless, because it shows the great interest in this program. So, and I think your other question about operating support is, yes, we redid our operating support program. It's now called the Operating Grants for Organizations program. And the whole idea is that if you go through this process, that you're set for a number of years so that you don't have to reapply year after year. Reapply year after year and have questions, so that you can be settled for a number of years and knowing how much you're going to get. And we've been, I would say in my 12 years here at the agency, we've been fairly settled. We've never had to go back on any of our obligations or prognostications of how much we're going to fund in the next year. So thanks.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, Penny Martorell had posted a question in the chat. Said, what are the best resources to stay abreast of what is real information about federal funding? So as the situation changes, where do we go to find out, what's really happening on the ground and how it affects us? Does anybody know, is there a source for that information right now, or are we in a wait and see situation?
I would say that I'm looking for the same stuff that you are, and I would say groups like this, reaching out to us, reaching out to organizations, following the news. It is a fast and furious evolving situation. So,
okay, so we have 3. Actually, we have slightly more than that people in our chat today that you can contact. The information's in the chat to get a hold of them if you do have specific questions in the future. Feel free to contact them. Plune. Oh, I'm sorry. No, first we're actually going to put Jess Colati on the spot. I hope you don't mind, Jess. Jess is with the Mass Board of Library Commissioners, and just interested in your perspective because you're going through this to some extent yourselves.
Sure. Hello, everyone. As Gloria said, I'm at the Mass Board of Library Commissioners, the MBLC. I'm the preservation specialist, and just to align with the information that's being shared, we receive for the state of Massachusetts from the Institute of Museum and Library Services about $3.6 million in our last appropriation. And we have those funds in hand. So similar to what some of the panelists shared, we are moving forward with our LSTA direct grants, which is about $500,000 allocated for this fiscal year. And we're in the middle of that process and we expect to be awarding them. We also, through our state appropriations, we're a state agency that receives about $46 or $47 million. We did have some increase asks, but we've been told we'll likely be level funded is where we're starting from. So similar to Mass Humanities, we're very excited about that as well. And so we're kind of like a lot of the other panels, just continuing as is. If you are a member of the Massachusetts Library System, the MLS, which can be libraries both in public and academic, but also special and those special, I know there's some folks here on the call, historical societies, museums, other cultural heritage institutions that meet the criteria of a library as defined by Mass Library System. You are eligible for our LSTA redirect grants. And that program is, like I said, we're currently in the review process for this cycle, but we have both smaller sort of grant in a box programs like for preservation assessments and other sort of set programming. And then and I don't want to misquote the caps, but we have two other tiers that are capped at 25,000 and 50,000 this grant cycle, eligible to libraries doing projects to enhance access, to connect with communities, preserve collections, digitization, and so forth. So we're kind of in that mix, and like the panelists have shared, we're continuing to work as so far. What we've been told is continue as normal, with the IMLS being a independent agency. They sort of haven't yet been impacted quite the same way, but things are moving. And with the state budget, we're modestly encouraged that we're hearing level funding. So we're just continuing status quo and looking at ways to protect the core, which is our internal agency mantra right now. And we kind of just figuring it out as we go. That's what we're doing. And when I can I'll go pull up and drop in the grant programs.
Yeah,
And
drop those into the chat.
if you're not sure if your institution or organization is already an MLS member, I know there's some folks here that I've talked to about joining or getting in touch with them. It's a free process. It just means that you're recognized as a library.
That does include our Historical Society archives. We are a member, for example. So yeah, so if you don't think of yourself as a library with a capital L, still consider this as a resource, because it is a useful one, and it does speak to what can often be the more neglected part of our collections, the files and the paper records and the archival resources. Plune has some commentary about, I know she has some information about the DCR. He wasn't able to attend today, but he did pass on some information for us.
Yes, I'm always a great advocate for the DCR Mass Trails program, because I love it when organizations work in their area and work on the landscape and work across town, as it were. So I got in touch with Eli Veluti Fry from DCR, who could not attend today, but he sent me some information and also told me that he is moving on to the Division of Ecological Restoration. And he has two co-workers whose email addresses I will pop into the chat, who anybody could get in touch with. So just in case you don't know about this program at all, it's called Mass Trails, this part of DCR, and it basically funds the creation of trails and rails to trails and things like that. But it also included funds historical trails or especially if they are both a historical trail and like an exercise or other kinds of, going out into the outdoors opportunity. So there are real opportunities in this program. So let me just read to you what he said. Let's see. We truly do not know what will happen in the coming months with the federal dollars that are attached to our program. At present, we feel confident they will continue on and have received a spreadsheet noting Massachusetts' appointment of the funding for the coming year. But things are changing fast in DC, and it feels wise to expect the unexpected at this juncture. I'm sorry, my dog just decided to go chew on his toy. So here he's going to give a breakdown of Mass Trails funding. Mass Trails is funded to two funding mechanisms: state capital dollars, just like MCC has state capital dollars, and recreational trails program funding through the Federal Highway Administration. So again, here we are talking about the Federal Highway Administration funding. Our state capital programming focuses on the build out of shared use path projects, what many people typically call rail trails or greenways. These are larger scale trail projects that help connect folks both for recreation as well as travel options between where they live, work, and play. From the historical perspective, this includes rejuvenation of many historical railbeds and bridges, including informational signage. Now, the issue here then is the Recreational Trails Program, which funds projects that are considered almost entirely recreational in nature. Excuse me. These are not just hiking trails, but also include snowmobile trails, equestrian, mountain biking, and paddle trails. And from the historical perspective, this would again mostly apply to informational signage, but may also include protection of historical land, which offers trail opportunities. I know that there's an organization in Leverett that is working on creating a new historic site, and I'm not sure whether they have applied or are going to apply. And there are other historical roads and places that perhaps have a lot of, we see this in the western part of the state a lot, where there are a lot of old buildings and cellar holes and stuff, and trails can be made around those. And so that is, of course, that is all federal funding, federal highway funding. So that is something to watch, and he doesn't exactly say, but he does seem to say that he thinks that it's going on for this year. And then he has web pages dedicated to the funding opportunities and a funding matrix, which I will put into the chat. And unfortunately, that is all I know about it. So you can ask me questions, but I don't think I'll have any answers. So thanks.
If you have his email, you can also put that into the chat and people can ask directly.
Yeah, he's moving on.
Okay.
But his colleagues, we have his colleagues, and I'll put them in the chat.
Great. Okay. Sky, you have a question.
Sorry, better? Okay. I'm the curator for a small museum in Western Massachusetts, and we're the birthplace of the separation of church and state. We have within our town, there's only about 1,500 people in our town. So we have a very, very limited budget, and it's difficult for us to find funding that will work for us because we can't match. It's just we don't have the people to provide the fundings that can be matched. And with Rev 250, there's no way we can spend $10,000. We don't even make that in a year. I'm concerned that small museums like ours are just getting excluded. And what can we do to push for more funding availability for institutions like ours?
I can speak to Mass Humanities grants and what our match policies are. So they are like 90% in kind, right? So that's people power, that's donated time and services. That's like, volunteer board members working on exhibit design. So you can apply for a Mass Humanities grant and make the match that exists there with the volunteer time and services. It's only 10% cash, which is usually like, depending on the size of the grant that you apply for, could be, between $200 or, up to $2,000 if it's a large grant you're applying for. So know that about our grant opportunities and what's possible there. And then the Reading Frederick Douglass Together grant too is, I think doesn't have a matching requirement anymore. We took that away because it's small. It's meant to be a small grant, that you can build a great discussion around, build programming around, invite your reps to, so they see the great work that your organizations do. And so that's why I think that advocacy for us on the state level, advocating for those state funds that go to Mass Cultural Council and Mass Cultural Council partners with Mass Humanities, that helps us give out those funds that are meant to be usable for small organizations. And we talk a lot about those matching requirements and what we can do to, make sure that those really are still accessible. And that donated time and services is something that organizations are really able to count up and show and say, like, an investment from the state is matched with, not always with cash, because maybe we don't have enough of that around, but we got a lot of people who are willing to put in the time, and we've got buildings that we're able to share, and resources people are able to donate. I think that's also a really important thing to be saying to our legislators, right? Money that goes to our communities is matched by activity in those communities, things people do and are willing to give.
Yeah, I will just put in another pitch for your local cultural council. Again, probably in a small town, probably has $5,000 or so to spend. I do not. It's up to the town whether they require matches or not. We have our Creative Experiences program, which promotes programs, festivals, projects, which again I do not have a match component to them as well. Again, it's 2,500 or 5,000. So. But I think a lot of the bigger grant programs do have, like the Cultural Facilities Fund by statute has a match, that one-to-one match that's required. So if you have capital issues.
Yeah, and I think Elizabeth has stepped away for a minute, but if you're looking at archival projects, definitely look into the SHRAB. I mean, it's not, as she said, it's not a bucket of money that they send, but they help with expertise. They have a small grant program to help with some supplies, necessary supplies. So there are sort of ways to build up things like that. I know Sarah Jane is here. If you want to mention the Roving Archivist program. Hi, Sarah Jane. Haven't seen you in a while.
Hi, it's really nice to see everyone. So, I'm sorry, the Roving Archivist program accepts applications twice a year now, and those deadlines are in May and November, I believe. The SHRAB website will be up to date with that information, and it's direct services, so there's not any money that's transferred to the sites, but at no cost to a repository, the roving archivist can come and visit and assess kind of where you are with your collections and help to set priorities and steer you toward best practices in all the work that you're doing in your collection stewardship. And we also can help connect you with other resources and grants and programs that would be appropriate for where you are with your collections work. That's it in a nutshell, but I can answer some more questions about it if anyone has any.
And if you don't mind, if you want to just throw did we put the, I think Elizabeth put the SHRAB links into the chat as well. So, so yeah, for small organizations without a lot of capital, I think one of the necessary one of the things you do need is eager volunteers that will provide in-kind services, and also, you do need some grant seeking, grant writing facility, but not necessarily a lot of matching funds, and you can sort of build from there. There are still some resources in the state that do speak to smaller collections, smaller organizations. Does anybody else have any questions or comments they want to make? Electra has asked, she says she doesn't seem to be able to save the chat or copy paste. Will we be sharing the recording and chat information to everyone who's registered? Yes. Yes, we will.
Thank you.
There is a whole lot of stuff. Today's chat is probably one of the most active I've seen since we've been doing this. It has a lot of information. It has a lot of links. It has a lot of contacts. So we will be sending it around, and we encourage you to keep an eye out because this is a really valuable archive of the information that we shared today. Are there any other questions? Anybody's got questions or comments? Has any, Plume?
I'm
Was that
sorry.
hand up?
I had asked, but I think it sort of scrolled up so fast that Catherine may not have seen it. But so I understood from what Catherine said that Mass Humanities does not use its federal dollars to re-grant, but to probably to fund its own administrating, I assume, and maybe its own advocacy efforts. And I'm wondering what happens. I mean, when I was there, periodically there would be the threat that NEH was going to go away. So I guess it's time to take the conversation there. What happens if that happens? And you don't know, but what is your estimation of that happening? And again, I don't expect anybody to be able to read the grounds. But Dave Slatery gave us some idea with some of the things that came from NEA. So just curious about what your estimation is.
Well, I am also just going to say no crystal balls here. Like I said, Mass Humanities is committed to giving out funds this year, and I think, as you said, Poon, when you were at Mass Humanities, it is always this question: will the NEH still be funded? So it's a question we're used to. And like I said, this year we're committed. Next year is what we make it, right? And so, as far as we know, we haven't been given any specific directives from the NEH to state councils. And there are state councils all across the country, one in every state and territory. And that is actually a real asset, I think, which we're part of a coalition. That coalition advocates with every representative in Congress. So that's been an important role in keeping the NEH funded. And so I think, we know as much as we hear, and they haven't sent anything specifically to us, and that advocacy work obviously continues. And, the Massachusetts delegation loves the work that happens in Massachusetts. So I think you should all feel confident and proud of that. And of course, you're always welcome to tell them and thank them for the advocacy they do for that program.
I like that idea, making sure we thank our representatives for the work they do. It's a good idea.
And as all our panelists have mentioned, advocacy is crucial. I think, the state legislature understands that, we do a lot, but there's a big economic, it's not just cultural and historical information that we disseminate. There is a big economic impact for cultural and arts organizations in Massachusetts and all over the country. And that's part of also what we need to demonstrate in our advocacy, not that we're just doing good work ourselves, but our good work extends to the prosperity of the state. And as we advocate and sort of show our numbers, we are driving home that point that the creative economy is a big part of Massachusetts and the country's prosperity.
If I could throw in and to echo something Catherine said earlier, obviously advocacy is extremely important. And I would encourage any of you, if you want to take a more active role in seeing that our important arts, humanities, and interpretive sciences programs get funded, Arts Advocacy Day will be at the State House on April 30th. I believe it goes from the morning into the afternoon. Catherine, I think, posted the link. We're working with our great partners, Mass Creative, the independent advocacy organization that's out there supporting our work, and would encourage any of you to come or encourage others to come. Numbers matter, and we hear from legislatures that they really appreciate hearing from the sector. So.
Yeah, and as I said, we will actually have a session dedicated to advocacy in the fall. And, you know, at that time, maybe have also a better idea of what the landscape is. But that's not necessarily work that can wait until the fall. So for programs like Mass Advocacy, you know, the Advocacy Day, Advocacy Week, which is now, was Catherine posted in the chat, think about this. You know, we worry about our funding, so think about what we can do on our part on an ongoing basis to try and, you know, try and continue it, try and protect it, try and emphasize how important it is in all aspects of statewide life. Susan?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
So I'll share that we were asked directly as an organization to complete an impact statement or impact survey by the Essex National Heritage Area. We've received support from them, and they're more from the federal level of funding, I believe. And as in that survey was to outline how they have a partnership grant that has helped with, for us, for capital improvements, but for others for interpretive signage and other areas. And also with Future Leaders grants, where we're able to hire young people to do work in the humanities. So we were asked directly by them, and I think they're culling all that information for their own advocacy efforts. We've just this morning been specifically asked to draft a letter on letterhead and send out to congressional and committee members, and they're compiling those as well to address specific reps in the area. So just as an example of what other organizations are doing, they're a smaller level funder compared to the other organizations on this call, or funders on the call. But I don't know, something to think about if in your own advocacy efforts, maybe requesting people who have benefited greatly from the support to really bullet point out what would happen if that support goes away. Because I don't think anyone also on the call has a terribly large budget. So any little piece of that pie that goes away has a huge impact. But that's all.
Another avenue is, I know our regional Chamber of Commerce has an arts and culture committee, and our job on that committee is, you know, it's not only a way of, you know, getting familiar with local businesses who might be sponsors of our individual organizations, but it's also a way of demonstrating, not through the arts community, but through the business community, the economic impact of arts and culture in Massachusetts. So if you have allies like that, other organizations that are sort of looking at the same issues from a slightly different perspective, if you work together, that can be synergistic, and also, you know, that will also help make the point more widely that what we're doing is useful in many, many ways. Does anybody else have questions or comments? We've got just over 15 minutes, or maybe I guess with the end admonitions, we'll have about 10 more minutes. So a little bit more time for comments and discussion.
I'd be happy just to add one thought, which is I appreciate the conversation about the economic impact of the work. That is always really important to highlight. I've also had great conversations with, I think, some folks who are in the room or maybe left the room about the way we talk about our work as combating social isolation. I know I had a great conversation with, I think it was Cambridge History Center about that. And I know that that's something a number of you highlight when you think about your work. So thinking about the ways we can talk about impacts on health, as well as economic impacts. And Mass Cultural Council's work on the social prescription program is another just great piece of evidence of the value of this work for healthy communities.
Dave, do you want to say a couple words about the social prescription program?
Sure. Yes, and so interesting idea. We kicked off this great idea. It's something that's been popular in England for years, and we kicked it off March 5th, 2020, and it's right before something else happened there, a pandemic. But the idea is that as an adjunct or supplement to medicine and other medical treatment, you could work with medical professionals and other professionals and human service professionals to prescribe an arts or cultural experience as a measure of to address certain health issues. And we've partnered with a nationwide group called Art Pharmacy, and working now with a number of insurance, third-party payers, and departments of public health across the nation in different states, and certainly here in Massachusetts. We've helped kickstart this program with some pilot programs, and like I said, we're partnering with Art Pharmacy now. And so we've seen great experts. It's been really applied in the area of, as Catherine said, mental health and isolation. Has been seen. Join a book group. But it's also been used, arts prescriptions, as walking tours at nature preserves or museums, dance classes for people with physical disabilities or physical aches and pains. It's a great program. It's really been exciting out there. We understand that we are not healthcare professionals at the Arts Agency, so that's why we've partnered with a nonprofit agency, and so a nonprofit partner, Art Pharmacy, and so we're really hearing lots of great work. I think Mass General Brigham is now doing a blood pressure study about using arts prescriptions on certain populations, and say, how does that affect blood pressure goals? So it's very interesting, and I can certainly I'll try to post something in the chat about it that can describe it better than I just did there. So thanks.
Plum?
I thought I had just unmuted myself, but no. I was just thinking when Catherine just posted about going to Humanities on the Hill, and following and liking on social media is always good, she said. And I was thinking about advocacy, and you can think of advocacy as two triangles, two pyramids. One is like this, in which a wide number of people advocate for themselves with a small number of people. And you can also think of it as an inverted triangle, the one that I can't do with my hands, right? The inverted triangle like this, in which small people like ourselves, but many of us, advocate up for the larger organizations. And it seems to me that in this case, what's needed more than anything at the moment, or maybe not more than anything, but what's needed now is that we all stand and support Mass Cultural Council, support Mass Humanities, and support them in their advocacy to those who will hear them, and spur them on to do something, and to try to change some of the more random cuts and things that are happening. But that in any case, that both those advocacies need to happen. One needs to advocate for one's own organization to organizations, who might fund one or help one, but one also needs to advocate for the field to the people who are the advocacy organization. Am I making any kind of sense? Like, it seems really important that we do that. And so as we consider what letters we're going to write, then letters, in support, of course, our our presentation representation in Washington
Bobbitt Emmon, 339-400.
is very much in favor of the humanities and culture sector, but nonetheless, it doesn't hurt to send them more letters that say, thank you for doing this. You know, stand strong and do more. Listen to them. They have they have our back, something like that. I just wanted to say that, but it's not only about money trickling down, right?
And
gotta
it's
trickle up
easier,
too.
yeah, and it's easier too for our representatives to advocate for us when they feel that, you know, they have our support. You know, if everybody's quiet, who are they talking for? But, you know, if there is a large groundswell of information and support to them, you know, there will be a greater tendency to see this as an important sector. I think one of the big takeaways today is, you know, obviously we know things are changing, so, but there are probably more resources out there than we are used to looking at. Trails, for example, or Arts Pharmacy, for example, you know, these are things probably not as much on our radar screen as, you know, operating support grants or project grants. So we need to think about our program a little bit more widely, and we need to think about the resources a little bit more widely. So, you know, maybe that also compensates if, you know, there's less in one bucket, there might still be other buckets for us to look at. So we do need to look more broadly at what's out there for us. We will provide as many, you know, as many resources as possible, as many sources of information as possible. There will be, Plune has just posted in the chat, we have a survey, a response survey after the conversation. We are really, really interested in your commentary. This is how we make the chats relevant. This is how we make the chats better and more useful to you. And also suggest topics. What's on your mind? What is it that you want to address, that you want to have a community conversation about? Because we're always looking for topics, and we would love to hear from you about that. And as I said, you know, the chat was very rich today, so that's going to be shared. So we encourage you to keep an eye out for that, and to keep an eye out for our future programs. We have several history studios coming up with authors. We're going to talk as well about publishing our own, you know, if any of you are thinking about publishing or want to know how that works, we have a chat on that coming up. And also think of this as a resource. Feel free to send us questions. If you, I assume because you got this, you're all on the mailing list, but we encourage you to sponsor if you can. We certainly encourage you to put yourself in the directory. That doesn't cost you anything, and it's a good resource for finding colleagues and being found by colleagues. And spread the word. You know, if you found this useful, or if you find the conversations useful, let your colleagues know. Get them to join the mailing list, so we have more people in these conversations, because the more people we can involve, the better the conversations are going to be. We've got a couple more minutes. Does anybody have any last minute comments or questions?
I'm actually, I'm wondering if the people on this call maybe can add your thoughts, but listening into this conversation as the you know, Conference and Commons coordinator with the MHA, and hearing you talk about the directory, Gloria, I'm actually wondering if it would be feasible for us to add a funding directory or a funders page to the directory.
We have pages for for most of the funders in the
Okay.
In the directory. The directory is set up as a place where everybody who has a role in the field to have their own page, from small businesses like my own, for instance, to the Mass Cultural Council is in there, and Mass Humanities, etc. So all of that it is in there, and it's searchable that way too, I think.
And if you are a funding agency and it's not in there, take a look, see if you're in there, and if not, get your information into that directory. Our aim is to cover every single history relevant organization in the state sooner or later. So yeah, I mean, definitely, add your information, send us suggestions. Absolutely the more the merrier, because this can be, it has been and will continue to be a real resource for history organizations in Massachusetts.
Yeah, and I think the more we all as a field can collaborate and communicate with each other, the better off we'll all be. So if you as an organization, if you know of funding organizations, if you have people that you work with, contact us and suggest adding them to the directory, and we'll do the behind the scenes work of getting in touch with them and organizing things. So yeah, everyone, be in touch. This is, I think, a way that we all can collaborate to hopefully, get through this stress that we're going through as nonprofits, is to work together.
Yeah. We're always going through funding stress one way or another. So, we've dealt with it before. We'll deal with it again. We'll figure it out. We'll find the path forward. Just another quick plug. The Mass History Conference is on June 2nd, and you'll be getting information about that soon. We're in the process of looking through the session proposals, which are really interesting. That information will be coming to you soon, so please keep an eye out on that.
So I think that we're at the end, and I'm going to thank our panelists, Catherine Stevens, Mass Humanities, Elizabeth O'Connell for the State Historical Records Advisory Board, and Dave Slatery for the Mass Cultural Council, as well as Jess Colati from the Mass Board of Library Commissioners, and Sarah Jane Poindexter, the roving archivist with Schraub. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank Gloria for your wonderful moderating work, and Rachel for your logistics and for making it all happen. So we'll see you next time. Meanwhile, we'll be sending around the information. Be in touch. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.